covering for so long. I'm glad they succeeded, man.
Hey, man, you guys are nominated tonight. Have a good show.
What are you trying to do?
I found an interesting connection between me and this week's album. It's true. Migos started in the same Atlanta suburb where I live now. Apart from geography, though, it remains to be seen how much of a connection I have to the music on Culture. But their story is definitely worth telling. Here are the 5 things for Migos. The story starts in 2008 in Gwinnett County, about 20 miles northeast of downtown Atlanta, and where I'm standing right now, with Quavius Marshall, Quavo, his nephew Kershnick Ball, Takeoff, and his friend from school, Kiari Cephas, Offset. The 3 of them put together a group called the Polo Club, but quickly changed the name to Migos, as in the 3 Amigos. My little buttercup. After a couple years of getting their sound together, they released their first project in August of 2011, a mixtape called Jug Season. The following year, another called No Label. In 2013, they teamed up with producer Zaytoven, who had previously worked with Gucci Mane, Jeezy, and other Atlanta artists, and released the single Versace. Versace made it into the low end of the Hot 100 and caught the attention of Drake, who remixed the song and added his own verse.
Born in Toronto, but sometimes I feel like Atlanta adopted us.
Later that year, Migos released their 3rd mixtape, YRN. The Y stands for young, the R stands for rich, and the N stands for nope. Spin Magazine gave YRN a rating of 8 out of 10, peaked at number 74 on Billboard's R&B/hip-hop album charts. In 2014, Migos released sequels to No Label, No Label 2, and YRN, YRN 2. And from these 2 sequels, the biggest success they had was the single Fight Night, which peaked at number 69 on the Hot 100. Nice! That November, they released their 3rd mixtape that year, 6th overall, Rich Nope Timeline.
See my first 50 ball at 18 years old. 18.
Rolling Stone put it in the top 10 rap albums of the year. In April of 2015, Migos were booked to play the Spring Bling concert at Georgia Southern University. But their set was cut short because police found drugs and firearms, and all 3 were arrested, as were several members of their entourage. Eventually, Takeoff and Quavo were released, but not Offset, though he was released later that December after accepting a plea deal. Their first full-length major label album, Young Rich Nation, was released in late 2015 by 300 Entertainment, an independent label distributed by Atlantic Records.
I bought a carpet from Aladdin.
Offset was still incarcerated the day of the album's release. Their time signed to the label was short, though, as they decided to sever ties with 300 Entertainment and go back to more regular mixtape releases. After a brief rumor that Migos had signed with Kanye West's management company, they released the single Bad and Bougie, which featured a verse from Lil Uzi Vert. The album I'm listening to this week, Culture, which features Bad and Bougie, was released on January 27th of 2017. Nothing to do with the album's release, but that was a bad week for me. Culture did extremely well. Bad and Bougie went to number 1 on the Hot 100, spawning 2 sequel albums and resulting in collaborations with Lil Yachty, Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, Pharrell Williams, Travis Scott, a ton of others. Plus their song Stir Fry from Culture 2 was used by the NBA for their 2018 All-Star Weekend. And even though Culture 3 had a delayed release due to the pandemic, that release was still seen as a cultural moment, if you'll pardon the expression, with Migos even making an appearance on NPR's Tiny Desk concert, their From Home series.
Nobody judge you but God. You don't watch us beat the odds.
But after that, it looked for just a minute like Migos might be on the verge of breaking up when rumors about Offset sleeping with Quavo's ex-girlfriend came to light. All tabloid hearsay, but reinforced by the fact that Quavo and Takeoff did release an album without Offset called Only Built for Infinity Links.
Don't put that hoe on none. No. Don't put that bitch on none.
But before that particular drama could play itself out, well, Takeoff and Quavo were at a bowling alley in Houston with some friends about 2:30 in the morning when an argument escalated to shooting. resulting in Takeoff's death. The following June, Quavo and Offset reunited briefly for the BET Awards to honor Takeoff. In the following October, they announced that Migos had officially disbanded, calling Takeoff the real leader and noting that it wouldn't be right to continue without him. And that's the 5 things for Migos. I'm off to listen to Culture. Back soon with First Impressions.
We actually had to reschedule because I guess there was some type of last-minute emergency before the
They
album
said you had
came
to fly
out.
back or something to fix a verse or something?
Nah, you know, we were just on the PJ figuring out the album at the same time. So you on the private jet figuring out the album, then trying to get to the Breakfast Club. Nah, they wasn't.
3 days before the album came out, y'all didn't have it right yet?
Yeah, we on the clock. We got
You gotta do the last minute touches. You can't rush greatness.
You know, my first impressions might be pretty short. For the most part, my initial reaction to most of these tunes is something like, so in this song, they're talking about drugs, women, guns, and fame over minimalist trap beats, as opposed to the previous 3 songs where they're talking about drugs, women, guns, and fame over minimalist trap beats. But there were a few points in the album that stood out for me. And please recognize that I have to be very careful about which music I excerpt to include here. The second track, T-shirt.
Mama told me, not to sell word. Mama 17, 5, same color T-shirt.
In the verse by Takeoff, you get just a glimpse of vulnerability and motivation behind the sex, drugs, and gun talk. The song is largely about dealing cocaine, specifically in the context of the Atlanta drug scene. I mean, even the word trap, it comes from an Atlanta slang term for a drug house. Takeoff starts his verse with some pretty standard themes about wearing diamonds, attracting women, carrying guns, and the like, but as his verse is winding up to something of a crescendo, he says, and please know that I'm paraphrasing here, I'm going to feed my family, ain't no way around it. Never gonna let up, God said show my talent. And I have to admit to being moved just a bit by the vulnerability he shows. Call Casting is the song I rolled.
Early in the morning trapping. Chop, you can get them on your asking.
The most interesting thing I learned while listening to this song for the first time is apparently kilos of cocaine are referred to as birds. So when they compare their house to a Zaxby's, it's supposed to be a reference to the vast quantities of cocaine they have for sale. Lots of drug talk on this album. Bad and Bougie is the big hit, I know, but it didn't really stand out for me when compared to the rest of the album. But I will say that, of all the guest collaborators on this album, I think I'm most fascinated by Lil Uzi Vert's verse on this song. His delivery and demeanor are unique among all the rappers on this album. Despite the long, slow beat, Deads still manages to impart a sense of urgency, thanks largely to the beat used and the repetition in the intro.
Fresh out the bed. Count out the dead.
Plus, the verse by 2 Chainz is fairly interesting. And I know that's not much to highlight, but most of the rest of the album feels pretty interchangeable to me. Overall, I mean, it's a vibe. All the beats are sparse, but they're also dark, minor keys, even Phrygian in a few cases. There's an overall feeling of hopelessness, like there's an overwhelming sadness and depression that's just outside the self-inflated bubble of bravado they've created for themselves. Certainly not showing up on the same playlists as Katrina and the Waves or Tiny Tim. Anyway, those are my first impressions. Back soon with final thoughts.
A rocket?
His name Takeoff, so I was thinking like a rocket.
They go a rocket is taking it.
You mean, but the thing is, anyone else says that, I would think, oh, just a little mini rocket. It wouldn't surprise me if I open up TMZ on Saturday morning and you've genuinely bought him a diamond-encrusted Jeff Bezos rocket and he's taking a flight to Mars.
I dug in kinda hard on this week's album. I did a lot more research and a lot more supplemental listening than I usually do. I watched Migos' Tiny Desk concert. I watched their videos. I watched documentaries from the New York Times and from Vox about flow, and specifically triplet flow. For example, I learned that the triplet flow is also called the Migos flow. Apparently the sound of triplets against straight time, that 3/2 polyrhythm that I mentioned when I was talking about Ice Spice earlier in the season, I mean, yes, it's been around forever, but in the last decade, that style has become overwhelmingly popular, to the point where it's on just about every rap album released today. And that's thanks largely to Migos.
If you listen to mainstream music these days, you know this rap flow.
Look, I might just chill in some babe. I might just chill with your boo.
I pull up in Rarers and shit, with choppers and Harleys and shit.
Another thing I learned, Most modern rap artists don't write out their lyrics before going to the studio. Instead, they'll use something called the punch-in technique. In other words, once in the studio, they'll improvise a few lines, stop, and then punch in additional lines when it comes to them until the song's done. And I think that style of composition is very impressive.
Yeah, no. We stopped writing a long time ago. Not many people write.
All interesting, I suppose, but here's the thing. When I listen to rock, blues, jazz, country, folk, fusion, bluegrass, classical, R&B, progressive, avant-garde, my mind makes thousands of connections as I listen to the music. This melody reminds me of this song, or these changes remind me of that style of jazz, or this instrumental timbre reminds me of this composer, or this synth patch reminds me of this German prog group. They enrich the experience of the music for me. And this is only possible for me because I've heard enough and understood enough music to have a fairly broad vocabulary in those spheres. But at the end of the day, the only reason why that broad vocabulary even exists in my mind is it comes down to the fact that I like the way the music sounds. Every once in a while, the pure artistic concept of a piece is enough to get my buy-in. Things like Stockhausen's Lichtcycle or Schoenberg's unfinished Jacob's Ladder, or anything by Henry Cowell or Charles Ives. But mostly it starts with, hey, I like the way this sounds. And I want so much to have that same rich experience with hip-hop. The genre has been around for 50 years now. It has its own evolution, its own framework of theory and convention, its own idiosyncratic means of composition and distribution. There is a lot of amazing music and amazing technical detail in this sphere. But my hurdle is this. I like the way some of it sounds, maybe even a lot of it, but not all of it. And that makes it hard for me to dive in to the extent that I would need to unlock this deeper level of appreciation. With trap especially. I understand that Migos talking about drugs, women, and guns is analogous to Dylan talking about riding the rails and sleeping in barns. It's a fantasy meant to speak to a common experience and a shared romantic vision. It's just that trap doesn't move me musically or lyrically. But I really wish I did. Oh my gosh, you have no idea the amount of FOMO I have regarding most of hip hop. Rappers are able to turn language directly into music. Do you understand the implication of that? Not through singing, not through accompaniment. The music is inherent in the rhythm and the rhyme of the spoken word. And I think that's amazing. I don't think anyone can reasonably disagree that rap artists have a better command of the potential of language than any other community that maybe has ever lived. And I admire that greatly. But I keep going back to a time in the late 80s when I was working for Stereo Sales in Tallahassee, running sound for a party at Florida A&M. We used to love working Florida A&M. We had these giant bass stuff. They loved renting stuff from us. We even did their football stadium. Anyway, at this particular show, I was talking to our contact from the venue, who was also the DJ for the evening. And I told him, I just don't get some of this. I like it. I think it sounds cool, but I don't always understand it. He told me, it's not for you. And despite the fact that hip-hop has become completely mainstream, maybe that's still true. Maybe there's still something essential I'm missing. Because the line that hit me the hardest on this whole album was in the song Brown Paper Bag.
You talking about modern day rap, but don't know the culture.
Fair. 100% fair. So that just leaves my 5-word overview of Culture by Migos. Alas, still not for me. Now let's see what I'll be listening to next week. Let's see what year we're talking about today. 1966. Well, that's kind of fun. The possibilities, my friends, are endless. All right, now for week and month. Curse these four-sided dice. Let's see. Okay, first week of March, 1966. Finally, chart position 1 to 100. Number 92. And on the Hot 100, 1966, first week of March, number 92 is Put Yourself in My Place by the Elgins. The Elgins? Motown deep cut. Amazing. Well, I know the single Heaven Must Have Sent You, but not Put Yourself in My Place. The song Put Yourself in My Place appears on their album Darling Baby, so that's what I'll be listening to next. Thanks for hanging out with me, everyone. I'll see you next week.